Our next speaker will continue talking about the cause of peace, now in a different manner. This is an amazing story. I checked my voicemail, and my voicemail said, this friend said, "Fran, just call me. I have a gift for you." Now, knowing this friend and who she is in the world, I had no doubt that it is something precious. The way I trust her, so I just called her back. I could hear her smile ear to ear. So I called her back to collect my gift. She said, "I heard from a mutual friend that you're looking for an expert to talk about the future of climate change. And I know someone exactly like that. However, he lives in Houston, Texas. But Fran, you just don't worry. You just have no worries and just trust this, no doubts." And I exactly did that. In a few days, she called me back and she had the confirmation. She said he would generously give his time and expertise to come to our conference all the way from Texas. This is all out of his commitment to the next generation. That our children should not suffer because our generation didn't do what they were supposed to do. And that time is of essence, and that time is now. This great friend of mine is Miss Maki Inamen. Our mutual friend is Mr. Doug Crocker, and our amazing guest speaker is Mr. Gary Dunham. Gary Dunham is the co-founder of Green Team America, a Houston-based environmental organization dedicated to helping educate America's youth about global climate change. Mr. Dunham was invited by former Vice President Al Gore to be a charter member of the Alliance for Climate Protection, and he was spoken about the effects of man-made pollution all over the world. In addition, he was the Director of Operations for the Climate Project, a nonprofit organization dedicated to lecturing about global climate change. In this talk, there is still time to save the blue marble, environmentalism, and the future of climate change. We will focus on the current status of man-made climate change and how we will eventually succeed in helping to secure the future of our planet. So without further ado, please welcome Mr. Gary Dunham.
Took a little while to get ready, but thank you so much. The room is a little light, and I don't know whether you can read that screen up there behind me or not, but it's a quote from President Kennedy about another time and another perilous era that we were living in, but it is extremely apropos for the one that we're living in today. This is a decade within an era that means an awful lot to the history of our planet. When I knew that I was going to be here today speaking, I do speak on campuses all over the country, but when I knew I was going to be here today and the underlying theme was peace, I wasn't quite sure how I was going to segue into my prepared remarks. I'm very lucky that we have a number of high schools in Houston that serve as sounding boards for the project that we have going, Green Team America. I was talking to my wife about this, about how I would work the peace into the overall theme of this, and one of the students spoke up. He said he understood exactly how to do it. So I'm going to intro with something that I don't normally do. But before I do, before we actually get into it, excuse me, I want to give you a disclaimer. Much of the information that I will be giving you is something you've heard about. Some of it you might not have heard about. But I do want to caution you, don't believe it unless you corroborate it for yourselves. Anything I tell you about the environmental situation that we face on planet Earth, don't take my word for it. Go home and prove it to yourselves. It's important that you do. It's important that you be on board. We do have a problem on planet Earth. That's what I'm going to talk to you about today. This is what a 16-year-old kid just pointed out to me last week. We have a problem, but we also have solutions. We know how to solve the problem. And if we do, we create opportunities. And I said, well, that's very deep for you, but what's the point of that? He said, well, the opportunity is simple. It's the opportunity to actually create peace on earth. And I put a menu up on the screen and don't quite know how to get it back off. So if somebody wants to come to my aid. Thanks. That's not meant to be a Christmas card sentiment. We do have an opportunity to create peace on earth. That brings us into the problem, and I want to go ahead and tackle the problem. I want to give it to you from a little bit different perspective than what you might ordinarily hear. I'm very fortunate to work with an advisory board that includes some of the top environmental scientists in our country. They speak in a language that is way over my head, but they are kind enough to gear it down so that I can understand it from time to time. But it's serious conversations. This is not what you're going to hear on television. It is global warming 101, and we do need to cover it so that everybody understands it. Everybody in this room ought to be able to tell a group exactly what global warming is all about. And obviously the first part of global warming is that we shouldn't be calling it global warming. It is man-made climate change. What generally stems from that is you want to wonder who is to blame. I think everybody already knows the answer to that. We are, the typical American family. We live an energy-sucking, energy-based lifestyle that the rest of the world wants to copy. That's where the problem comes in. We started it, but here's the element we need to pay attention to. CO2. That's the bad guy. Again, I don't know how clear this image is. You can barely see it up there behind me because the room is so well lit. But that's a portrait of a coal-burning electric generating plant in Joseph City, Arizona. It looks just about like what you can see most of the time. We burn coal to create electricity. And this is a number that you need to pay attention to. We can measure coal and the CO2 emissions that it puts into our atmosphere in a number of ways, but probably the base of most of the statistical information that we use today comes from ice cores. If you're familiar with them, they're absolutely amazing. Up until just a couple of years ago, we used statistics that went back over 600,000 years. We drill an 8-inch ice core down through a glacier in Antarctica, pull up maybe a mile worth of ice, and it's styrated. It has a lot to do like the rings on the crosscut of a tree. You can actually count the layers of time backwards. And we can study various time elements. We could pick a time, say, when Jesus lived on earth. slice out what looks like a transparent hockey puck that's full of a gazillion little bubbles, actually extract the ambient atmosphere out of that bubble and tell exactly what was in the air and what was flying around on Earth at that time. We know how much CO2 was in the air. Now we can go a lot deeper. Science has taken it to the level where we can look back at almost 1 million years of history on this planet. And we know what the ambient atmosphere was like for almost 1 million years. And in that 1 million years, we have never recorded over 300 parts per million of CO2 in our atmosphere. 1 million years, peaks and valleys, but it never went above 300 parts per million. I mentioned our advisory board a little while ago. The key member of our advisory board is Dr. James Hansen. He is probably the preeminent environmental scientist in the world. He's the fellow that coined the phrase tipping point. He did it when he was testifying to Congress some 11 years ago. And he told Congress, we better start worrying about the amount of CO2 in our atmosphere because it is rising so rapidly. He said we have a 10-year window of opportunity to do something about this CO2 rise. And if we didn't, we might hit a point, he called it the tipping point, that we might not be able to back up from. He predicted 350 parts per million was the danger level. We had better not go back 350, let's do something. We had 10 years to do it. 9 of those 10 years have gone. Today, we're at 390. Actually, that slide's a little out of date. We're at 391 parts per million. We not only hit the 350 mark, we went well past it. And what's even worse, we're still climbing. That mark that shows how CO2 is climbing is closely related to the population increases on our planet. When we started the Industrial Revolution, somewhere back there around 1890, there was a little over 1 billion people on this planet. You can see as we march forward in the years how parts per million of CO2 in our atmosphere go up as well as our population goes up. Quite recently, I was happy to note that my wife and I were presented with our 2nd great-grandchild. And when Zach is sworn in to be President of the United States, as I'm sure he will one day, there will be 10 billion people on this planet. In that short time span, we've gone from a little over 1 billion to what will be 10 billion people. That's a problem. Let me tell you how the problem manifests itself. You might have all heard that in December, there was a massive environmental conference in Copenhagen. How over 100 countries were there, vowed to not repeat what had gone on earlier in Kyoto, Japan. We were going to do something positive this time. The countries of the world were going to get together. We were going to pledge ourselves to do the right thing to save planet Earth. There was a group of computer nerds that made that trip as well. They set up a station so that at the end of every day, they took the concrete proposals that were proposed by the various nations, they would put them into their computer program and extrapolate out the results to the end of the century. And if they did what Belgium wanted to do, it would show what effect it had on the parts per million in our atmosphere by the end of the century. Every day they published those results. At the end of the conference, they had almost 100 concrete plans, none of them ratified yet, all proposals. And if they took every single one of those proposals, put them together, extrapolated the results to the end of this century, you know what would have happened to our 391 parts per million? We would go to 770 parts per million. Not a single one of those plans was ratified, thank goodness. But we would go into an area that the world has never been before. I can't stand up here and tell you what the world would be like because we've never been there before. In over 1 million years of history, we've never gone over 300 parts per million. But I can tell you this, we won't just be absent penguins and sea otters and polar bears. We'll be absent most of the life as we know it on this planet if we allow that to happen. And of course, we won't. Let me show you a pretty picture. This is a NASA satellite photo taken on an oblique angle to show the atmosphere of the Earth. That white band you see up there at the top, that's our atmosphere seen on side edge. I don't know that there is one here in this university, in this college, but if there is a library here where you have one of those gigantic big globes in a cradle, we've all seen pictures of them, it probably has a coat of varnish on it. And the varnish coat on that globe is relatively as thick as Earth's atmosphere to our globe. That's how thin our atmosphere actually is. And this scientifically advanced species that we are has managed to change its composition. We all know how it happens. Everybody's aware of it. The sun's energy comes down through our atmosphere, hits this planet, and some of that energy is absorbed into dark areas like our open oceans and some of the land areas. Some of it bounces back out through the atmosphere when it hits things like the Arctic ice sheet, the sands of the deserts, and so forth. So a lot of energy comes in, some of it's absorbed and heats the planet to make it livable. The excess energy is radiated back out into space. That's how this planet works. That's how we can survive on it. If we change that balance, if we change the amount of energy that is radiated back out into space, we have too much energy that's trapped here, and that's global warming. Do most of you remember where you were yesterday at this time? If you can, dwell on it for just a moment. From that time yesterday to right now, 90 million tons of CO2 were emitted into our atmosphere around the globe. It's an invisible gas. You can't even see it. It has virtually no weight, and yet accumulatively, we put 90 million tons of it into our atmosphere. Take that out to a yearly level, and that means we put 40 billion tons of CO2 into our atmosphere. Now, I don't know about you, but my mind refuses to dwell on subjects like those numbers. I can't get my brain to really conceive them that well, so one of my students, again, did a little figuring for me, and he said, do this. And the time it took that sound to leave this desk and reach your ears, another 1,000 pounds of CO2 was generated into the atmosphere. That's how serious this problem is. Every single second of the day, another 1,000 pounds. And so things happen. We create global warming. Things begin to move around, rain patterns shift, great droughts occur. Australia is in the midst of a drought that they've never had in recorded history before. The country has changed so radically because of the change of the rain patterns that have shifted, that were we to solve global warming today, it will never recover to the extent that it was. It is permanently changed. That's pretty serious. Before you feel too serious about the Australians, that's not Australia. Google up the Colorado River and you'll see these pictures. This is the United States. Bunch of college students out here. Everybody recognize what this is? Could you name it? Could anybody name it? It's the Great Ocean Conveyor Belt. This is what causes or dictates the climate on our planet. All the ocean currents in the world are connected. They move around in a giant belt, like a conveyor belt, and that's what it's called. If you look at the area, right up there, That's where the main drive action for this conveyor belt, there are others, but that's the main one. That's what keeps this belt in circulation. That's what moves things around, causes the jet stream. That's what El Niños affect. That's what causes the climate on our planet. If we change the ambient temperature around the globe, we affect the temperature in our oceans. The oceans affect the conveyor belt. Our climate begins to change. That's what's causing it. We used to have an ice belt that covered all of Northern America all the way down to about Oklahoma City, which did go through a mini melting phase and melted. That's where our Great Lakes came from. That's what's starting to happen again right now. We are affecting the Great Ocean Conveyor Belt, which is affecting our planet, which means things are beginning to melt all over the planet. Let me show you an interesting picture. This is a NASA satellite photo where they've digitally taken the clouds off the planet so you can see what it looks like. See the big open blue area right up in the middle up there? That should be solid white. That's the Arctic ice cap. And as I'm sure you all remember from your high school science classes, ice that's in water, if you took a glass of water and put some ice cubes in it, and the teacher would ask you the question, what happens to the level of the water when the ice cubes melt? Well, you know that the ice is already part of the volume of the water, nothing happens to it. So the problem is, if that ice melts, as this illustration has shown, we don't do anything to the ocean levels. Don't get worried about that, because that ice is floating on water up there already. But take a look just to the middle. That's Greenland. Last week I sat down with Dr. Conrad Steffen in Houston, who literally lives on the ice sheet in Greenland. He spends 11 months of the year there keeping track of it. Greenland is melting. The ice cap on Greenland rests on land. When that ice melts, the water goes into the oceans. That's extra water. The ocean levels begin to rise. It changes the atmosphere. What you're looking at now is something that I was told when I was in elementary school was mythical. The mythical Northwest Passage, that you literally could start out from England in a boat and sail right over the top of the globe and reach the fabled East markets. You couldn't do it for real because the Arctic never melted. Well, it has melted. Boats now regularly traverse that level. They go through there. It affects everything. It affects polar bears, and they're cute, and nobody wants to see them go away. I have a friend who runs the polar bear program in the Cincinnati Zoo. They have 6 polar bears. At the last time I visited with them, 3 of them were pregnant. They can breed polar bears. He said, that's the good news. The bad news is, in less than 10 years, there won't be a live polar bear outside of a zoo anywhere on this planet. We've destructed their habitat so bad that their fall-off rate, which normally would be gradually lessening of their numbers, we're about to hit their fall-off rate where it will just drop precipitously. That's pretty bad news, but this gets even worse. This is a pretty bleak picture I'm painting for you, because I think you need to know just how serious it is. Here's a geography lesson. Start up there at the upper left, that's Nepal. If you move straight down, you're looking at India. Off the bottom of the screen would be Bangladesh. All that greenish, grayish mass up there on the right-hand side, that's China with Tibet Tibet on the left-hand side of it. That white mass going to see up the middle of that thing looks like icing on a cake. That's the Himalayas, the ice pack on the Himalayas. Authors around through history have called it the roof of the world. That's the second largest accumulation of ice on the planet, second only to Antarctica, and there's 100 times the amount of ice there that is represented in the Alps. Very important, because 7 of the world's mightiest rivers are created out of the spring melt of those ice caps. They create the India's Ganges, the Yalu, the Mekong, and a couple with the names about that long that I can't pronounce. 7 of them. Over 40% of the world's population depends on those rivers for their water. That means their food depends on it as well. If those ice caps ever break down, 40% of the world's population is going to go into water food starvation. They're the fastest melting glaciers on the planet. If you want to get a little more cheerful, that looks like a little piece of paradise, and it really is. It's a real place. It's called Tuvalu. It's out in the Marshall Islands, out in the South Pacific. Looks beautiful, but if you get up close, it's not quite that beautiful. Tuvalu is coral-based. It means it's very porous. They could actually build a wall around the islands to keep the rising seawaters out, and they talked about doing that, but it doesn't work there because the water can percolate right up through the coral. There's no way to stop the ocean rise. The oceans are rising. Tuvalu is shrinking. There are over 10,000 people that are looking for a place to immigrate. They've asked Australia and been refused. They've asked New Zealand and they haven't gotten an answer back. Nobody has given them immigration rights yet, including us. 10,000 people are looking for a home. And if that weren't serious enough, you could think of another island, Loichara, right off the Ganges Delta River, right off of the coast of India. It was the last stronghold for the Royal Bengal tigers that tourists from all over the world used to go see. But Loichara, in case you don't see it, it's because it's about 12 feet below that water level, has already gone under. And a number of its sister islands have gone under as well. The ocean rising is not going to affect the populations of the world. It has already begun to affect them. Hurricanes, where I come from, we're in Hurricane Alley. We got hit pretty hard this year. Global warming doesn't cause more hurricanes, but it is absolutely undisputed. It causes stronger ones. That will continue, that will keep on going. And it really makes you want to ask the question, can we even save ourselves? And I want to skip over this next part fairly quickly because the answer is we can save ourselves, but we've got some problems along the way. Everybody here is aware of the car companies and the troubles that they've had recently here in this country. They've had to go back and retrench themselves, and the reason that they've had to do it is because of the energy situation that they're tied to. We build cars in this country that run on fossil fuels. And I want to show you a comparison I'd like for you to think about for just a minute. These guys you may not recognize, but anybody in here with a little gray hair remembers when they testified to Congress. These are big tobacco. These are the manufacturers of most of the cigarettes that were sold in this country. Not only do they have their hands raised, swearing that they will tell the truth to Congress, every single one of them denied the fact that tobacco has any ill effects at all. Their products had no bad effects on their market. One of them even went so far as to swear to Congress that his product was beneficial. People were better off for smoking than not smoking. And they did it for an obvious reason. They owed their shareholders a profit. They were bound and determined they were going to create it. Well, so do these guys. This is big oil. You can imagine how popular what I'm saying now is when I give this speech in my hometown of Houston, when half the audience is working for one or none of the oil companies. The second guy you see up there from the left is John Hofmeister. He's the past president of Shell Oil. He is now a greenie. He's moved out of the petroleum and fossil fuel business. He runs a not-for-profit. He will tell you, quite frankly, that as long as there is still something like $100 trillion worth of petroleum and fossil fuels under the ground, we're not going to change. And that may be true, but that's not even the worst of the problems. This is the name of a documentary. Has anybody seen it? A couple of you, I've seen it. You ought to look it up. You can Google it up, you can look at it on your laptop, because a truism will come through it that has a whole lot of bearing on where we are today. This is what the movie's about. This is called the EV1. It was an electric car made by General Motors, and 14 and a half, almost 15 years ago, there were a couple of thousand of them running around this country. Tom Hanks drove one all over Southern California at this time. They were a fully electric car, had no fossil fuels in it, had all the wonderful little benefits, didn't make noise, didn't have pollutions coming out, ran beautifully, everybody loved them. General Motors realized they had created a Frankenstein, pulled every single one of them back off of the markets, shredded them up, threw them away, and denied they have any idea how to make another one. Today, they've announced that they're marketing the Chevy Volt. It has still got so many problems with it, they can't get it on the streets right now. Makes one wonder how they suddenly forgot how to build the thing that they designed in the first place. Believe me, we could put an electric car on the market anytime the market decided that it wanted to have it so. But fossil fuels is big business. And this is the biggest. This is not the gentleman who owns the coal company from the recent disaster we just had, but he represents the next biggest one. And coal is our problem. That's what we've got to change in this country, and we must do it fairly quickly. This monster was built for one reason and one reason only, to take coal and put it on trains to be delivered to electric generating plants around the country. And you see that train? Imagine the picture I showed you of that man. His one massy coal operation sends a train just like that 37 miles long every single day. That's how much coal is coming out of one operation, and there are 400 such operations. We burn a lot of coal. And despite the tragedy that took place literally just days ago in our own coal mine here, and it's a very sad fact of life, coal mining is very dangerous. We don't do a whole lot of mining left in this country now. What we do is mountaintop removal. This is West Virginia, and this is how they get the coal. As I said, it's called mountaintop removal, but they don't just remove the tops of the mountains, they take the whole mountain down. They take the sludge and put it into the stream beds and poison them for 1,000 years. They cannot put the mountains back. And take the one state, we're talking about a lot of states, by the way, West Virginia, Kentucky, Tennessee, and a lot of states around, a lot of coal come from those areas, but take the one state of West Virginia. There's a fact that's generally thrown around in high schools around that will tell you that the only man-made object that you can see from the moon is the Great Wall of China. And that's not really true. You can't see it with the naked eye from the moon. But I'll tell you something that you can see from deep space. That's the scar that we put on West Virginia by removing 450 mountains from that one state alone. They're gone. You can't rebuild them. You can't put them back. You can't unpoison the streams that their slag caused. And we did it because we need the coal to make the energy that we use so abundantly. And the worst thing about that number is it's growing. It will get only worse. And those poor miners that died recently, let me tell you about this. This is a coal mine in China. China has thousands of coal mines. They're opening up a new coal-fired generation plant at the rate of 1 a week. And if you average it out, 7 Chinese miners die every single day producing that coal. That's a horrible statistic. But they need the coal as bad as we do or worse. So, can we save ourselves? Can we do it? Can we do it in time? And thank God the answer is yes, we can. I want to spend just a few minutes now with you, but I ask you to do something for me. Please take off your Republican or your Democrat hats. Quit thinking in political terms. What I'm about to say has nothing to do with politics. This is a moral issue that we're talking about. It's an ethical issue. And if peace is on your mind, you think about what we're talking about right now. These gentlemen have a chance, and I don't care which party they represent, but they have a chance now to take the opportunity of this dilemma that is facing us and doing something very positive about it. The problem is, we've all seen our Congress in action over health care reform. And I will tell you now, I for one believe our government is not going to solve the climate change problem in this country. It might eventually get around to it if things get bad enough, but we will have already passed the tipping point by then. And us, we're not going to do it either. That's not the answer to this. Here's the answer. We know very well how our problem got started. Take a look at all the white hair that I've got. I represent the generation that set the standards for this energy-crazy lifestyle that we live. My generation caused the problem. I can look at a number of you out there that represent middle-aged America. You ought to be solving the problem actively right now, and unfortunately you're not. So who's going to solve it? Well, the kids that are going to have to grow up and live in this society are the ones that are going to have to solve it, and thank goodness they're already motivated to do it. I'll tell you how I know we're going to do it, and I'll tell you what we're going to do. I'm 74 years old. I was 6 years old when Pearl Harbor was attacked. I remember it probably didn't happen overnight, but it seemed like overnight this entire country woke up with the same mission. We didn't argue about should we defend ourselves. We didn't debate whether we should go to war. We didn't protest the idea that there would be sacrifices and lifestyle changes. None of that happened. We just all got together. We did what we were supposed to do. The government acted, the population acted, and we solved what was then the worst disaster that ever faced our country and our planet. I know it can be done if we can get that kind of enthusiasm generated, and I think this is the way we're going to do it. About 30 miles south of here, a couple of years ago, when I was working with Al Gore in Nashville, I got a call from a teacher in the San Diego area. She had asked me if I could send a couple of speakers down into her school. It's the Sweetwater School District in Chula Vista. She wanted to know, could I send a couple of speakers in? Well, for us, normally speaking, we're not like Al Gore. He can go on campus and draw 20,000 people, but our normal classes were 30 kids in a science class somewhere or something. So a big number to us was a nice challenge. We went to her school district, and in 3 days, we talked to 15,000 kids and faculty members. So that blew me away. I thought that was fantastic. We need to do more of that. And what was really great about it was, I used to start off these sessions by asking people for a show of hands. How many of you believe that global warming is real, or it could work the not real, and see how the audience was divided? Many times I'd get about half and half. School kids aren't that way, especially high school kids. You ask them, is there anybody in here that doesn't believe that global warming is a real issue and is on our doorstep right now? And the classroom and the room will explode. They will say, they all know it's real, and they all know that they have to do something about it. It's their problem. So we talked to 21 schools, and it was an amazing experience for all of us. At about the same time, we had the clincher. When that gave us the idea for Green Team America, I also got a call from one of the people that we had trained in the Gore group, who was with the Sierra Club in the San Francisco Bay Area. They had acquired 500,000 free CFLs, the twisty little light bulbs that suck up less energy. We got them free. The only catch was we had to distribute them in a meaningful way. We couldn't put them in somebody's garage and just hide them. We had to get a group big enough that could handle it. And I had just met with the Girl Scouts of America, bringing them on board our latest ad campaign. So the Girl Scouts in the San Francisco Bay Area agreed to act as our student body. We took 500,000 CFLs, and the girls and their parents and their Den and Scout leaders went into the neighborhoods and distributed 500,000 free CFLs over a weekend. That made me realize we could overcome a couple of the only negatives that kept us from solving the global warming issue. You can get the green bug. You can go home and change your thermostat and caulk your windows and buy a better refrigerator and do all those things that you know you ought to be doing for the planet anyway. But you can't very well measure any real personal impact on the overall message of global warming. But we had an engineer from PG&E tell us after that meeting when the girls passed out those bulbs, he said, if we'd have known beforehand what you were trying to accomplish, that I could have set up a visual display, a real-time display, and showed you the state of California power grid. He said it undulates, and it goes up and down in peak times and down valley times and so forth. He said, if those 3 days, he said, if you could have got everybody to screw in, and that was 500,000 CFLs on the same day, I would show you the state power grid take a dip. We would have affected the power grid of this entire state. So jump to Green Team America. That decided us, that's what we were going to do. So we created an organization to bring together the environmental clubs that already exist in high schools across the country. When I talked to Mr. Gore about it, I wanted to get his help, and he said, no, you guys do it. You're on your own, which was the best advice we ever got. So we started Green Team America, and here's what we found out. There are over 30,000 high schools across this country. Most of them have an environmental club or a science club, or maybe even a debating team that does recycling in the schools. They almost all have some sort of an environmental group already there. What they don't have is any synergy between them. This is illustrated by, in Houston, the very classic example. We have St. Agnes Academy, a girls' high school prep school that's separated from a boys' school only by a parking lot. They both have environmental clubs. They both have over 100 members. Their faculty advisors have never met each other. They've never joined together in any kind of project that they do, and they don't even know each other. We know that if we can put them together, we can create a force that will really have some impact. Gore told me, he said, you know what it sounds like you're trying to put together is something that Roosevelt created back in the first Depression, the old CCC, the Civilian Conservation Corps. And that is exactly what we're doing. Now they called it that, but it was really just a ruse to be able to give people work so that they could feed their families, even though they had the name conservation in their title. So I looked them up just to see what they did do, and they did do some conservation things. One of the things they did, they planted trees. They planted 6 billion trees over a 2-year period. Here's the last of those nasty global warming statistics I'll give you. And please Google this one up. I do it about every 3 months just to make sure I'm still correct. We need trees, and again, back when I was a kid, the teachers used to tell us trees are like the lungs of our planet. We only have a couple of ways to process CO2. It's either going to go into the atmosphere, it's going to go into the ocean sinks, or it's going to be processed by trees. Trees are important. We're losing them. The largest concentration we've got on this planet is the Brazilian rainforest. And we are losing trees through natural processes, through slash and burn, and through timber, through pirate timbering. We're losing trees in the Brazilian rainforest at the rate of 1.5 acres every single minute. Every minute of every day, we lose another 1.5 acres of those trees. We can afford to plant a few trees. We need to do it. So that set the theme for what we're doing with Green Team America. And here's how it's going to work. First thing we did is we acquired, thank goodness, a number of supporters. The University of Houston and Rice University heard about our project and adopted us immediately. We also brought on some commercial sponsors. So we were able to put together an organization to use Houston as our starting point. We created an advisory board. I told you about the gentleman that was testifying to Congress and created the term tipping point. This is him. Dr. James Hansen. He also runs the Goddard Space Studies Institute for NASA. He's just one of the typical advisors for Green Team America. Bill McKibben is probably America's premier green author. He's written over 25 books on the subject, and he is the one that has created the 350 organization. The 350 being the number we need to reduce our CO2 level down to. This is a close friend of mine, Bill Bradbury. For a number of years, he's the Secretary of State for the state of Oregon. He has multiple sclerosis. He rides around on a Segway to go to all the speeches and things he does, and will very likely be the next governor of Oregon. This is an American iconic artist, Peter Max. He designed our logo. He's quite a colorful character. If any of you watch Fox News, I don't recommend it, but if you do watch Fox News, you're familiar with Greta Van Susteren. Well, this is her sister. This is the smart one in the family. She's a forensic psychiatrist, a consultant to the CIA, one of the most intelligent women that I've ever met, and she's one of our energy spark plugs. This is Dr. Andre Droxler, PhD for Earth Science at Rice University in Houston, who made me aware that when he went to school and when he first started teaching, the term earth science meant teaching geologists how to go look for oil. Earth sciences now means something a little bit different. It's an opportunity for us to actually study the science of the earth and what we can do about it. So we decided to start in Houston, and we did. Houston's our target city. We started with a target of 100 schools to sign up. We have those 100 schools. 50 of them are already active, and the other 50 are in the process of coming on board. In order for a school environmental club to become a member of Green Team America, they have to make a couple of sacrifices. One of them is the students have to go home and do an energy audit on their own home. A clipboard questionnaire of 100 questions. They probably will not pass it. Not many of those students live in LEED Platinum homes. So they have to write a remediation plan. They have to write the plan of how they're going to bring their homes into compliance. It's the illustration of the soccer mom syndrome, because that's, quite frankly, is how we feel like we're going to solve the problem. When I threw up the current administration's picture just a little while ago, and I've tried to caution you, don't think of those guys as Democrats. It's not the idea of which party is in power right now. Government is not going to solve the problem. Neither are the family, they got worries, they got priorities, and global warming is not one of the higher priorities. But the soccer mom syndrome, if Junior comes home and says, Mom, Dad, I just joined the soccer team, like it or not, that family is plunged into the world of soccer. So if we can send Junior home and say, I just learned that we need to change our lifestyle in order to save this planet, then we will get those families involved. They may not want to do it consciously, but we're going to get them, and we need to get them. And of course, we're going to grow it. Our second area of growth will be right here in Southern California. When we begin this winter setting up our second growth area, this is right where we will come. We will be talking to many of you over, and here's what we're trying to accomplish. By the end of this year, we'll have 200 clubs, 250 clubs in operation. That's over 10,000 students. That's only in the Houston, Texas area, but that's a lot of power. By the end of 2013, we will have a national expansion, and we will cover those 30,000 high schools that we were talking about earlier, and then we're talking about 3, 4, maybe even as many as 5 million kids. We will have the power to do some very important things. I'm only going to tell you about 3. Our advisory board has come up with a whole menu of things that we can throw these kids into, And they can make that same kind of impact. One of the things is I told you about the Girl Scouts and doing the CFL swap. Well, we know that works. So we're in the process right now. While I'm out here on the West Coast talking, we've got our volunteers in Houston distributing 25,000 free CFLs to high schools in the Houston area for Earth Day, which is next week. Some of them will do it on a single day, some of them will do it all week long, but they're bringing light bulbs, old-fashioned incandescent light bulbs from home, bringing them into their schools, and taking home free CFLs at home. If they take home as many as 4 and screw those in at one time, the only obligation that they have is to have their parents go over the next electric bill that they receive. They should actually notice a difference. 4 CFL light bulbs will make a difference in your electric bill at home. Those kids know that. We're arming them with a lot of material. That's the first step of their obligation of changing the lifestyles of the American people, which must happen. Second program, we're going to plant some trees as well. We've teamed up with a group called Trees of Houston, which is involved with the National Arbor Day Foundation. We're going to plant trees. Most of these environmental clubs I've talked about have already done a tree planting, and it's generally not a happy memory. The kids wash cars, sell baked goods, make some money. They'll go out and buy some trees from Lowe's or some garden shop somewhere. They generally plant 3 or 4 trees on school. They'll plant the wrong trees at the wrong time of year. They're not maintained, and a week later they're all dead, and everybody has a bad feeling about it. We learned the hard way. Our trees, when we do these national programs, will be planted with and in accordance with the city's parks and recreation departments, so they'll all be planted on land that will be maintained. We will use the city arborists and the city foresters. I didn't even know we had arborists and foresters, but all cities do. And they will take care of the program of maintaining these things. One of our students figured out these 30,000 campuses we're talking about, if we plant the trees in most of those places with the average number of kids of 80 per club, we will plant in a single weekend a forest and cumulatively the size of the state of Connecticut. That's impact. That's something that we can all be very proud of. Here's another thing that we need to do something about, and I'm not talking about chubby ladies in shorts. We've got to do something about the plastic avalanche that's coming out of our high schools. Out of our grocery stores. There are a lot of innovations that are being made right here in California. San Francisco does a lot of neat things, but on the whole, across the country, we can't seem to tackle this problem head on and do anything about it. We have enough volunteers in the city of Houston right now to let us engage in the fact that we will take every single major food outlet in the city of Houston on a single weekend. We will put students with free tote bags. Now, they may have various companies' names on them, but they'll stop the customers going in and ask them for a simple pledge: if you won't take plastic out of the store, we'll give you a free tote bag, or 2, or 3, or 5, or however many you want. Don't take plastic out of the stores. We think we can do it on a single day. We've asked the city to adopt legislation. We've gotten an agreement out of them. If we can do that, if we can pull that off on that single day, the city council has already agreed, every single member has agreed that they will enact legislation to make it a city law. They want to see us take the lead. The kids are the ones that are going to solve this problem. We're going to build things. The kids can build a tool shed on their campuses if that's what they elect to build, or they can get a little more inspired and build something for Habitat for Humanity. But whatever they build will be overseen by the U.S. Green Building Council, and it will be LEED certified. Every single campus that we've got out there represented by our school kids will have a LEED certified building on its campus to inspire later generations. Let me tell you the one last thing, I'm going to bring this to an end right now. These are kids that are in a Chinese club, just like the U.S. clubs we're talking about. One of our board members, on his own, is not even part of Green Team America, he just did it on his own, brought us the plan to take 40 of our kids this summer to Beijing and Shanghai for the Shanghai World Expo. There's a youth peace summit that's going on as part of that. Our 40 students will be there. They will be teamed up and they'll travel with 40 Chinese students along with them. And here's the reason we're focusing on this. 3 years ago when I started giving these presentations, I remember very distinctly that I would tell people that shamefacedly, we are the worst polluters on this planet. Our lifestyle dictates that we put more CO2 into the atmosphere than any other people on the planet. But China is coming up close behind us. They're gaining on us. That was 3 years ago. Last year I had to change that we no longer are the worst. We lost our worst position. China passed us. China now produces more CO2 emissions every year than we do. China and the United States left that Copenhagen conference in December without a single definite binding statement of anything that we will do to reduce our carbon emissions. And listen to this. This may not impress you as much as it did me, but this is something I think about a lot. If we are the two worst polluters, if China and the United States could get in harmony and not reverse our emission level, if we could just stop increasing it. I showed you the increase from the day from 70 million tons a day to 90 million tons a day globally. If we could only agree to stop the increase, we'll just level it off at the level that we already do. If both companies would bind themselves to that agreement, we just stopped global warming. CO2 takes literally centuries to degrade out of our atmosphere. That's why we concentrate on CO2. Methane is bad, and by the way, as we're melting everything around the world, we're releasing massive amounts of methane. That's a whole different scary movie. But if we can stop the CO2, nature will start healing itself. That's the peace part of this thing we're talking about. If we can create the peaceful situation, I absolutely have no faith that our governments are going to get around to it in time. They will eventually, but not in time. People themselves are not going to motivate themselves to rise up and do it in time. Eventually, we would, but not in time. The students are our last best hope. We weren't planning on taking these students on the international side of Green Team America for another 2 years. So our people are getting so excited that they're revving up our agenda. I'm at the end of what I came to talk to you about, and I sincerely hope somebody out there is asking themselves at this point, well, we're not moving, but I'll just tell you what the last slide was. It's supposed to, I hope I've motivated somebody to ask, what can I do to help? If any of you happen to have your checkbooks and want to write a $10,000 check, that would help. But I don't really think that's going to happen. What we would really like to have you do is, we have a number of brochures about Green Team America over here that has our contact information on it. The help we need is to get you involved. If anything I've said has motivated you at all to care about it, I'll finish it up with just this, and then I'll be happy to take any questions. when I first started again, I'll have to admit to you, I was not an environmentalist. I've never been, my background's advertising and marketing. I'm one of those shallow, hollow people that was trying to sell people things that I had absolutely no confidence in myself. I've never used the word passionate in regard to myself other than with my marriage. I didn't feel passionate about anything. But I am passionate about this. I used to, when I started, I couldn't very well make eye contact with somebody and tell them that we're trying to save the planet. It embarrassed me to say it. But I've had a number of youngsters come to me and tell me that what we're doing means so much to them, and then when I had one of them really make me realize what we're talking about, I've had questions come to me like talking about the Arctic ice cap going away. I've had kids ask me, does that mean Santa Claus isn't going to have a place to live? Well, that's charming, but that's not what this is all about. I've also had kids ask me, global warming, is it going to get so hot, is everything going to burn up? Well, no, that's not right either. But people don't really think a lot. This came out at dinner last night. We were talking some of this, and this is what landed on the table. That we don't ever say what the real problem is, what the ultimate of the real problem is. And here it is. Think about this. Planet Earth, suffering from global warming, isn't going anywhere. It's going to be here. It's us that might not be here. That's what we've got to save. And there's only one way to do it. It's got to be through cooperation. It's got to be that we've all got to get together and we've got to care about the same thing. We've got to care that Chinese people are not going to get through this problem. We've got to care that the Tibetan Plateau is going to make almost half the world run out of water. We've got to care about each other, and we've got to care about this planet we live on. It truly is the only one we've got, and the world is in our hands. Thank you. I would be happy, I think we've got about 5 minutes, but I would be happy to answer any questions that anyone might have. I take it to mean I must have done a fairly decent job. Thank you again, audience. I appreciate it.
Thank you for that very inspiring speech you gave us. It's informative, transformative, inspirational, and I'm glad that you mentioned that you know, this earth is not going to go anywhere. It's going to be here, it's us. If we are doing anything, it's really actually pretty selfish, you know, something for us to do for our species. It's not that we are doing Earth any favor. Actually, we are doing ourselves a favor. So I want to ask you guys, now that we have had this conversation, please, when you leave, give your name tags to us so we can recycle that, so we don't next year when we are going to have this conference or any other gathering like so, we don't have to use more plastics and stuff like that. So please, at the end, turn it in. And also, please turn in your evaluations. The reason this year is such an amazing conference with our speakers is that because you asked for it, you got it. You know, that's what you asked for last year. This is what you said you want to see. And we act upon it. You know, we take it seriously. We really value your time and your being here, so we would want to address the issues that is matter to your generation, is matter to you. So we want to definitely make sure that we would address them. We'll have amazing people like Gary that will give their time and their gifts and talents so generously to us, and will come and talk to us about them. So we would like to hear about that. So we would really appreciate it. We would hear from you. At this point, probably we are going to, if you don't have any questions, we'll take about 15 minutes break, stretch your legs, and just, you know, grab something to drink or something like that, and we will be back here by 2:45, so we could start the conversation with Dr. Paul Taylor. All right, thank you so much.